Move now or I'll call security, the flight attendant hissed, her voice snapping across the plush cabin. Naomi Brooks, a composed black woman dressed in tailored navy, didn't argue. She didn't shout. She simply smiled, the kind of smile that meant she knew something no one else did. Within minutes, that entire plane would grind to a halt. The uniformed woman who thought she had the power. She was about to find out she had humiliated not just a passenger, but the owner of the entire airline. Before we unfold how quiet strength rewrote the rules that day, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you stand for dignity and respect, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories that matter. The Miami sun gleamed against the windows of Liberty Air Flight 714, casting golden streaks across the tarmac as boarding commenced. Inside the terminal, passengers bustled toward the jet bridge, some already speaking of weekend getaways, others lost in emails and itineraries. Among them was Naomi Brooks. She moved with the kind of quiet elegance that didn't ask for attention. It just naturally commanded it. Her tailored navy pantsuit fit with effortless precision, her dark, natural curls pulled into a smooth, low twist at the nape of her neck. She walked with a steady poise, the wheels of her slim carry-on humming softly behind her. A black woman in her late 30s, she carried herself with calm assurance, the kind that turns heads, not because she's trying to, but because she doesn't need to. To most, she appeared to be just another accomplished traveler. But she wasn't just anyone. Naomi Brooks was the CEO of Liberty Air, the airline she was boarding. Not that anyone knew, Naomi wasn't interested in making scenes. She didn't announce her presence with security escorts or title badges. Today, she was headed to Denver for a summit. Her company was sponsoring a summit where her name appeared on the agenda, but where she would speak last after everyone else had said their part. She wanted to see her airline as others experienced it. That was how she always tested her teams, quietly, authentically, without privilege announcing itself. As she stepped onto the plane, the first-class cabin welcomed her with its soft piano jazz, beige leather seats, and the faint scent of citrus polish. All the luxury one would expect in first class, at least for those who were expected. At the front stood Lauren Doyle, the lead flight attendant. She was in her early 40s, tall and crisp in appearance, with an air of control so firm it felt practiced. Her smile stretched wide for the passengers she liked. For the others, it barely moved. "Welcome back, Mr. Raymond." "Mrs. Raymond," she said warmly to an older couple just ahead of Naomi. "We've saved your favorite seats." She helped them with their coats, her voice sweet and familiar, like they were old friends. Then Naomi stepped forward. Lauren's smile cooled almost instantly. "Boarding pass?" she asked, not unkind, but with none of the charm she'd lavished moments earlier. Her voice was polite but clipped. Naomi handed it over with a slight nod. Lauren scanned the ticket 1A. She said, her lips tightening. There was a small pause, not long enough to be obvious, but just enough to sting. She handed the pass back without making eye contact. "Right this way." Naomi nodded again and continued down the aisle unfazed. She caught a glance from Mr. Raymond, who nodded politely. She returned it with the grace of someone used to being watched and underestimated. At her seat, she placed her carry-on beneath the seat ahead and pulled out a well-worn hardcover and a slim metal water bottle. No designer logos, no flash, just quiet, self-respect. Lauren lingered by the galley watching. Her gaze lingered just long enough to leave a chill in the air. Naomi cracked her book open and leaned back slightly in her seat. She didn't need to be acknowledged. She needed the moment to unfold naturally, and it would. Lauren Doyle moved through the first-class cabin with measured steps, her polished shoes clicking softly on the plush carpet. She offered warm smiles to a businessman adjusting his cufflinks, a playful wink to a young couple on their honeymoon. Yet when her gaze flicked toward Naomi Brooks, the warmth vanished. There was something about Naomi, the calm way she occupied her seat, the quiet authority she radiated without saying a word, that unsettled Lauren. Naomi's dark skin, her unshakable composure, her effortless elegance, none of it fit the image Lauren had built in her mind of who belonged in first class. She tried to brush off the unease, but old memories surfaced. Years ago, Lauren had stopped a man she thought was sneaking into business class without a ticket. She'd been praised for being vigilant. Then, that moment had stuck with her, warped into a quiet conviction. If something felt off, it usually was. And somehow Naomi felt off to her, though Naomi had done nothing but sit quietly with a book in her lap. As Lauren pushed the beverage cart down the aisle, she caught Naomi's polite nod. "Excuse me," Naomi said, her voice soft but clear. "May I have a glass of water, please?" Lauren paused for half a second too long. "In a moment," she said curtly before moving on. She handed drinks to Mr. and Mrs. Raymond with practiced ease, laughing lightly at one of Mr. Raymond's jokes. She poured sparkling water for the young honeymooners, even offered an extra cookie to a little boy seated 2 rows back. But when she passed Naomi again, her tray was conveniently empty. The atmosphere in the cabin shifted subtly but perceptibly. A few passengers exchanged looks. Others buried themselves deeper into their magazines or screens, pretending not to notice. Naomi did notice. She noticed everything. She saw how Lauren's smile dimmed when she looked her way, how her service grew slower, how she lingered longer by other seats but never by hers. Naomi didn't react outwardly. She simply folded her hands in her lap and waited, her calmness only sharpening the contrast against Lauren's growing hostility. Across the aisle, a man in a navy suit, the same one who had watched Lauren's earlier greeting, frowned slightly, sensing the tension, even if he didn't fully understand it yet. Lauren rolled the empty beverage cart back toward the galley, her spine stiff with unspoken judgment. Naomi watched her go serene on the outside, but already cataloging every slight, every choice, every word left unspoken. She had seen this before, and she knew this was only the beginning. Lauren returned to the first-class cabin, her steps quicker now, her nerves sharpened by a frustration she could no longer hide. Naomi Brooks sat quietly in seat 1A, her posture as composed as before, her book still resting on her lap. That calm, that unshakable calm, irritated Lauren more than any loud confrontation ever could, without so much as a greeting. Lauren stopped at Naomi's row arms folded tightly across her chest. "Ma'am," she said, her voice louder than necessary, drawing the attention of several nearby passengers. "I'm going to need you to move to the back. This section is reserved for our premium customers." Naomi looked up, her dark brown eyes steady. Without a word, she reached into her blazer and retrieved her boarding pass. She handed it over, offering it with a grace that seemed to mock the chaos swirling around Lauren. Lauren took the slip of paper but barely glanced at it. Her mind was made up. "This can't be right," she muttered, her tone dripping with disbelief. She shoved the ticket back toward Naomi without a second glance. "You'll need to relocate. Now." A ripple moved through the cabin. Heads turned. Phones were subtly lifted. Across the aisle, a man in a navy suit stiffened in his seat. A child in row 2, his legs swinging off the edge of his chair, piped up innocently, "Mommy, why is she being so mean to the lady?" His mother hushed him quickly, casting a nervous glance toward the confrontation. Naomi remained still. She placed her boarding pass neatly on the tray table in front of her and folded her hands in her lap. "I am in my assigned seat," she said, her voice calm, clear, and measured. Lauren's face flushed red. She took a half step forward, her hand twitching at her side. "Enough," she snapped. "I'm not going to argue with you. Move." Naomi tilted her head slightly, studying Lauren with the quiet patience of someone who had endured moments like this before and knew how they usually ended. "I'm not moving," Naomi said, her tone even. "You should double-check your list before you make assumptions." Lauren's chest heaved, her fists clenched tighter, and then without warning her hand moved. The slap cracked through the cabin like a gunshot, the sound bouncing off the polished walls and wide leather seats. Passengers gasped audibly. A businessman dropped his coffee. Someone sucked in a sharp breath. Even the music piped softly through the speakers seemed to falter. For a moment, Naomi's head snapped slightly to the side from the impact. Her cheek flushed red immediately, the skin stinging, but her posture never broke. She turned back slowly, her eyes steady, her mouth a calm line of steel. Across the aisle, Grace, the junior flight attendant, stood frozen near the galley, her hand half-raised, horror written all over her face. She looked desperately toward the other crew members, but none of them moved. Fear and confusion locked everyone in place. The silence that followed was oppressive. It was the kind of silence that shouted louder than any argument could. Naomi blinked once slowly. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't return the blow. She simply sat, her dignity undiminished, her spirit unbroken. Around her, the passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away ashamed. Others stared openly, waiting to see what would happen next. But no one, not a single soul, said a word. Not yet. Naomi lifted her chin slightly, the faintest glint of something fierce flickering behind her eyes, and Lauren, standing over her with a trembling hand and a sinking stomach, realized too late that she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. Naomi didn't flinch. Her cheeks still stung, a slow warmth radiating outward, but her breathing remained even. Around her, the cabin was gripped in silence, the kind that only followed something shameful. She didn't look to the crowd for support. She didn't scan the faces for sympathy. Instead, she picked up her phone. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, as if she had all the time in the world. Assaulted. Seat 1A, Lauren Doyle. That was all it said. No dramatic punctuation, no explanation. No hashtags. She tapped send. Then she placed the phone down on the armrest and leaned back in her seat, her posture as poised as it had been before the slap. The red mark on her cheek glowed against her deep brown skin, a bruise in the making, but her gaze never faltered. 5 rows back in seat 5D, a sharply dressed man in his early 40s felt his phone buzz. Zachary Lane, Naomi's executive assistant and right hand for the past 8 years, glanced at the screen. He froze. Then, like clockwork, he moved into motion. He didn't stand. He didn't shout. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he opened a secure contact list and tapped twice. One call went to Liberty Air's in-house legal counsel. The other to the company's director of aviation operations. Emergency escalation, he said into the receiver. Flight 714, Naomi Brooks, first-class cabin. Assaulted by senior flight attendant Lauren Doyle. Confirm crew roster. Begin lockdown protocol. Do not let this land quietly. No one near him noticed what he was doing. That was the point Zachary had handled media storms, hostile takeovers, and executive betrayals. But this would be personal, and it would be swift. Up front. Lauren stood near Naomi's row, the tray still clutched in her hands, her knuckles white. Grace, the junior attendant, inched forward, her face pale. She looked toward Naomi, then back at Lauren. Her voice trembled as she spoke. Lauren, I really think we should. Stop, Lauren snapped, whirling on her. You don't need to think, just follow orders. Grace recoiled as though slapped herself. Her lips pressed into a line. She looked away, her eyes hot with shame. Naomi watched the exchange without saying a word. The businessman across the aisle cleared his throat. He looked like he was about to speak, then thought better of it. His eyes dropped back to his magazine, which he hadn't turned a page in since takeoff. Naomi crossed her legs gently. Her hand grazed the corner of her phone again, but she didn't pick it up. She didn't need to. The storm was already moving beneath the surface, the kind of storm that didn't need thunder to be heard, only precision. Lauren stood near the galley now, her breath short, her pride still trying to catch up with her fear. Something about Naomi's stillness, that maddening serenity, was beginning to wear on her nerves. She wanted Naomi to yell, to fight back, to give her something she could point to and say, "See, she's the problem." But Naomi refused to oblige. She sat like a queen in a chair. The crew never expected her to claim, not because of a title, but because of how little she needed one. And 5 rows behind her, the gears had already started turning. The cockpit door clicked open. It was a quiet sound, not dramatic, not rushed. But in the tense stillness of the first-class cabin, it rang out like a signal. Captain Reynolds stepped into the aisle, his polished shoes silent against the plush carpet. His face, normally composed and unreadable, was tight, controlled. But anyone paying attention would have seen the flicker of unease in his eyes. He wasn't a man who liked surprises. And this one had arrived straight from Liberty Air's corporate headquarters with 2 words that changed everything. Naomi Brooks. He paused just behind Lauren, who was refilling a tray of champagne flutes with jittery hands. "Miss Doyle," he said quietly. Lauren turned. Her spine straightened at the captain's voice, her usual confidence flickering back for just a second. "Yes, Captain, we need to speak," he said. Then with a quick glance to the watching passengers, he added with more emphasis. Now a murmur rippled through the cabin. The businessman across from Naomi lowered his newspaper completely, now his brow knitting. Lauren's smile wavered. "Captain, I'm in the middle of... You're being relieved of duty for the remainder of the flight," Captain Reynolds said evenly but loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "You are to return to the crew galley and await further instruction." The flutes on Lauren's tray clinked as her hand trembled. "Relieved," she repeated, blinking. Why the captain didn't answer. Instead, he turned slightly, his eyes scanning the cabin until they landed on Naomi. The quiet woman in seat 1A, still seated, still composed. Not a single word raised, not a single gesture made, just watching. Lauren followed his gaze, confused. At first, then her stomach dropped. No, this can't be," she whispered. Captain Reynolds stepped closer. His voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it now. Miss Doyle, Liberty Air's executive command has been notified. They've informed me that Miss Naomi Brooks is not only a first-class passenger, but the current owner and chairwoman of the airline. Gasps. One came from the socialite in 2B who audibly sucked in a breath. Another from the Raymonds who sat frozen in stunned silence. The businessman next to Naomi muttered, "She just ended her own career." Lauren took a half step back as if the weight of the words physically struck her. "No, that's not... I didn't know." Naomi said nothing. She didn't even blink. Captain Reynolds continued. "Corporate has ordered an immediate review of in-flight conduct. As of now, your role in cabin service is suspended. Please hand off duties to your junior attendant and return to the galley." Lauren's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Her eyes flicked wildly between the passengers, searching for someone to defend her. They all looked away. Naomi finally shifted just slightly. She reached for her book again, flipping the page like nothing had happened. Lauren stood there frozen in place. Then, as if her body had finally caught up to the reality of her choices, she slowly turned and walked down the aisle past rows of stiff-backed passengers and silent stares. Her posture was rigid, but her hands trembled as she clutched the tray to her chest. Behind her, Grace, who had been standing near the curtain, quietly stepped forward, taking the tray from her. "I've got it from here," Grace whispered. Her voice was soft, but this time it didn't shake. The captain gave Naomi a respectful nod before returning to the cockpit. No apology, just recognition. And still, Naomi hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Everyone on that plane heard her loud and clear. Lauren Doyle sat rigidly in the last row of the aircraft, her uniform now a stark contrast to her diminished presence. The once authoritative flight attendant now appeared small, her gaze fixed on the floor, avoiding the eyes of passengers who had witnessed her fall from grace. The cabin was enveloped in a heavy silence, the kind that follows a storm. Conversations were hushed, movements deliberate. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken thoughts and collective introspection. Captain Reynolds' voice broke the silence, calm, yet firm, over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to unforeseen circumstances, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Atlanta. We appreciate your understanding and cooperation." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged glances. Others looked straight ahead, processing the announcement. The gravity of the situation settled in, and the reality of what had transpired became undeniable. Grace, the junior flight attendant, approached Naomi with a damp towel. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered it. "Ms. Brooks," she said softly, "for the water spilled earlier." Naomi accepted the towel with a nod, her expression unreadable. She dabbed at her lap, then folded the towel neatly, placing it on the tray table. Her composure remained unshaken, a pillar of strength amidst the turbulence. Nearby, whispers began to surface. A man in a business suit leaned toward his companion, voice low. "I can't believe we just sat there, did nothing." His companion nodded, eyes downcast. "She was so calm, I thought she was just another passenger." From across the aisle, the nosy socialite who had earlier dismissed Naomi whispered, "She looked so calm, I thought she was nobody." Naomi, without turning, responded, her voice steady and clear. "Power doesn't need to shout." The words hung in the air, resonating with those who heard them. A poignant reminder of the strength in silence, the authority in composure. As the plane began its descent, the city lights of Atlanta twinkled below, oblivious to the drama unfolding above. Passengers braced themselves not just for landing, but for the aftermath of revelations and reckonings. Naomi sat back, eyes closed briefly, gathering herself. The journey was far from over, but the path ahead was clear. The tires screeched softly against the runway as Liberty Air Flight 714 touched down at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The aircraft rolled to a smooth halt near a private terminal far from the usual bustling gates. The engines hummed in idle, but no one moved. No standard welcome announcement came. No rushing to grab overhead bags, only a dense, waiting silence. Then the soft sound of the cabin door unlocking clicked through the stillness. Two uniformed security officers stepped onto the plane, their presence impossible to ignore. Sharp Navy uniforms, radios clipped to their belts. They weren't here for routine business. Passengers shifted in their seats, tense, expectant. Some discreetly lifted their phones' cameras, already recording, eager to capture what they suspected was coming. One officer stepped forward, voice calm but carrying authority. "Lauren Doyle, he announced, scanning the front rows. "Please come with us." Lauren sat frozen in the jump seat at the back, her hands white-knuckled around the armrests. For a brief moment she didn't move, as if she could will herself invisible, as if she could somehow undo what had already unfolded. The officer called again, firmer this time. "Lauren Doyle." Slowly, Lauren rose, every movement stiff, her face drained of color. She smoothed the front of her uniform with shaking hands and began the long, humiliating walk up the aisle. As she passed phones tilted toward her discreetly, a businessman in 2C, the same man who had earlier watched with silent judgment, began to clap. Once, then twice. The sound was slow, deliberate. Others joined, hesitant at first, then stronger. The quiet cabin was now filled with the soft, steady rhythm of clapping, not celebratory but cathartic. Lauren's head dropped lower. She refused to look at anyone, especially not Naomi. Naomi, for her part, remained seated in 1A, serene, untouched by the chaos unfolding around her. She didn't glance at Lauren. She didn't acknowledge her at all. Her silence was louder than any confrontation could have been. Behind Naomi, Grace stood at the galley, exhaling a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her hands were still trembling slightly, but relief flickered in her eyes. Justice rare and raw was unfolding before her. Naomi's executive assistant, seated quietly in 5D, leaned forward and whispered just loud enough for Naomi to hear. "The board already knows they're waiting for her when she gets off." Naomi didn't respond immediately. She simply smoothed the edge of her blazer, her movements unhurried, composed. Only after a long moment did she murmur almost to herself, "Good." Lauren reached the front of the cabin where the officers waited. Without ceremony, without a chance to offer excuses, she was led off the plane and into the awaiting vehicles beyond the glass. No one stopped her. No one spoke in her defense. As the cabin door closed behind her, a weight seemed to lift. Passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring quietly, the oppressive energy of the earlier flight evaporating like morning mist. Naomi turned her gaze back toward the window, watching the reflections of the airport lights flicker against the dark glass. She had endured humiliation. She had been judged and disrespected, but she had never once relinquished her dignity. Now the tide had turned, and the world was still watching. Night draped itself over the Atlanta skyline. City lights blinking faintly against the vast, dark horizon. In a quiet hotel suite, Naomi Brooks sat by the window, a glass of still water in her hand. Her posture composed, her gaze distant. Her phone buzzed once on the low table beside her. She didn't reach for it immediately. She took a slow sip of water, first letting the silence of the room settle around her like a second skin. When she finally picked up the phone, a new notification stared back at her. Email from Lauren Doyle. The subject line was simple. Empty. Almost, "I'm sorry." Naomi hesitated only a second before tapping it open. The message was short, rushed, the words spilling out like someone desperate to undo what had been done. "Miss Brooks, I realize now that I made assumptions. I didn't see you, not really. I just reacted. I let my own judgment cloud my duties, and I caused harm. I'm sorry for what I did. I hope someday you can forgive me." Naomi read the email once, then again. Her face didn't shift. No smile, no scowl, just a long, still moment where the weight of the words floated uselessly between her and the screen. Across the room, her executive assistant, Danielle, glanced up from a chair, sensing the change in energy. "Lauren," Danielle asked quietly. Naomi set the phone down, her fingers light against the surface. "She says she didn't see me," Naomi said evenly. "But she saw me. She just didn't believe I belonged." Danielle didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The truth had been laid bare in a way no apology could erase. Without another word, Naomi swiped left, deleting the message with a flick of her finger. It vanished without ceremony, without response. Outside the suite's windows, the soft hum of traffic carried on indifferent to the small private justice unfolding within. Meanwhile, not far away, Grace sat in her tiny apartment, her heart pounding as her phone lit up. She picked it up with trembling fingers and read the message from Liberty Air's HR department. "Grace, your detailed incident report corroborated multiple passenger accounts. Your courage in speaking up helped validate critical evidence. We'll be following up about next steps and commendation." Grace let out a shaky breath. She had worried, hesitated, afraid of the consequences if she spoke against a senior attendant. But now she realized doing the right thing had been the only choice that mattered. At the hotel, Naomi turned her gaze back to the city beyond the glass. Somewhere out there, Lauren Doyle was probably replaying every moment of the day, trying to claw back something already lost. But Naomi wasn't angry anymore. She understood now that some battles weren't fought by shouting, by grand gestures, by matching fire with fire. Some were won by staying still when the world demanded you shrink. Some were won by wielding silence, not as surrender but as strength. She finished her water, set the empty glass aside, and sat back in the chair, letting the hum of the city blend into the rhythm of her own quiet triumph. The night stretched on vast and patient, and Naomi Brooks, calm, composed, unshaken, let the world turn without needing to chase it. The news broke early. Before the sun even rose fully over the skyline, across major media outlets, headlines blazed, Liberty Air implements historic passenger rights reform after viral incident. The Naomi Brooks standard, a new era of dignity in the skies. Inside Liberty Air's sleek corporate headquarters in Dallas, a press conference buzzed to life. Cameras clicked, reporters jostled for position. Behind the podium stood the newly appointed chief operations officer, a woman with a polished composure, but there was no mistaking the weight of the moment. She adjusted the microphone and spoke clearly. Effective immediately, Liberty Air is proud to announce the Naomi Brooks standard of passenger dignity. A large screen behind her lit up, displaying the new policy's guiding principle. Respect isn't a luxury, it's the baseline. It is owed, not earned. Mandatory anti-bias training would now be rolled out across all departments, not just flight attendants, but gate agents, ticketing staff, even senior executives. Training modules would include real footage from Flight 714, blurred for passenger privacy, but clear enough to capture the moment. Lauren Doyle crossed a line that would never be ignored again. Employees would sit through it. They would hear the cabin fall silent. They would see Naomi Brooks remain seated, calm and composed, while chaos built around her. They would watch not just to witness failure, but to understand what accountability demanded. Meanwhile, back in her hotel suite, Naomi adjusted the cuffs of her navy blouse and prepared to step into her own small spotlight. In a live televised statement, she appeared not behind a podium, but sitting simply on a stool, the city skyline wide and brilliant behind her. No notes, no teleprompter. Just Naomi poised, deliberate, certain. Respect, she said, her voice steady, is not something to be earned based on appearances. It's not a privilege given to a select few. It's the foundation of any place that claims to offer service, hospitality, or simple human decency. She let the words breathe before continuing. When we allow assumptions to guide our actions, we tear apart the very trust that binds communities, companies, and society itself. I'm proud to see Liberty Air take this step. But let me be clear, this isn't a favor to passengers, it's a responsibility. One, they owe every soul who walks onto their planes. Her gaze didn't waver from the camera. This isn't about luxury, this is about dignity. The statement was short, less than 5 minutes, but by the time Naomi finished, the chat streams under live broadcasts were flooded with applause emojis, words of admiration, and calls for more airlines to follow suit. Across the country, training sessions began in earnest. In a small conference room at Liberty Air's Miami hub, a group of newly hired flight attendants sat stiffly as a screen lit up. They watched the recreation of what had unfolded on Flight 714. They saw the way assumptions hardened into mistreatment. They saw the ripple effect of silence. At the end, bold letters filled the screen. Every passenger deserves dignity, no exceptions. Grace, the young flight attendant who had hesitated but ultimately documented Lauren's behavior, received an email she hadn't expected. Promotion approved, senior flight supervisor, effective immediately. Along with it came a personal note from Liberty Air's president, thanking her for her quiet courage when it mattered most. Across the industry, other airlines took note. Internal memos buzzed through aviation circles, warning that failure to address bias would no longer be a private embarrassment. It would be a public reckoning. As for Captain Reynolds, the pilot who had stepped up and immediately taken action after being informed of Naomi's status, he was formally commended. In a small ceremony at the Atlanta hub, he received a commendation plaque inscribed simply, "For integrity in action, no grand speeches, just quiet respect." Meanwhile, Naomi stayed far from the celebratory noise. She declined interview offers, refused endorsement deals. She hadn't done any of it for fame. She had done it for the next black woman who would walk onto a plane in a navy blazer and sit in 1A without being questioned. She had done it for the young man boarding with a backpack and a valid ticket. She had done it so that silence could mean peace again, not fear. As night fell over the city, Naomi sat by another hotel window, the world glittering beyond the glass. She smiled faintly, not with pride, but with purpose. Tomorrow would come, and it would look different, because today she made sure of it. Weeks later, under a pale blue morning sky, Naomi Brooks stood once again at the gate of Liberty Air Flight 376 to San Francisco. Same airline, different feeling. She walked calmly down the jet bridge, her navy blazer crisp, her rolling suitcase trailing softly behind her. As she stepped into the first-class cabin, a subtle hush fell over the crew, not out of fear but recognition. This time there were no cold glances, no second looks. The new lead attendant, a young woman named Kayla Hart, approached with a genuine, easy smile. "Welcome aboard, Miss Brooks," she said warmly, her tone free of anything but sincere respect. "We're honored to have you flying with us." Naomi nodded, offering a polite smile, her posture as composed as ever. She moved toward her seat, 1A, the same seat. Only now it held a different meaning. There was no stiffness in the air, no veiled skepticism shadowing her steps. Other passengers glanced up briefly as she passed, normal, casual, unbothered, and returned to their books, their conversations, their screens. Naomi placed her bag neatly under her seat, settled into the plush leather, and pulled out a slim hardcover book. The hum of the engines preparing for departure filled the background. She leaned back, letting herself take a slow, measured breath. Above her, a junior flight attendant approached quietly, barely out of training, a young man with nervous hands but kind eyes. Without a word, he placed a folded note on Naomi's tray table and stepped back. Naomi glanced down. The paper was small, neat, handwritten. "Thank you. You changed everything." She paused for a long moment, her fingers lightly brushing the paper's edge. The engines roared softly as the plane began taxiing the cabin, dipping into that familiar muted calm before takeoff. Naomi didn't seek out the young attendant to respond. She simply tucked the note into the inside pocket of her blazer close to her heart. She turned her head toward the window. Outside, the runway stretched wide and endless, the morning sun gleaming off the tarmac like a promise. The jet lifted smoothly, leaving the ground behind. As the city shrank below and the clouds swallowed the horizon, Naomi smiled quietly to herself, a smile not for victory, not for vindication, but for something rarer. Change. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't demanded, she hadn't stormed, she had simply remained still, firm and undeniable. And by doing so, she had shifted an entire system. The world often taught that power was loud, flashy, unmissable. But Naomi Brooks had proven otherwise. Sometimes the most profound change comes from the quiet strength of refusing to be moved. Sometimes the most powerful message is spoken without raising your voice. The plane banked gently westward, climbing higher into a sky that now felt wider, fairer. Below, policies had changed. Training programs had been rewritten, conversations had been forced into daylight, silent assumptions had been cracked open. Naomi closed her eyes briefly, letting herself savor it. Not the fame, not the headlines, but the knowledge that someone boarding next week, next year, maybe a little black girl with a first-class ticket in her hand, would be treated like she belonged before she ever had to prove it. And maybe she'd never have to fight this battle at all. The jet soared higher, sunlight flooding through the window, and Naomi Brooks leaned back in seat 1A, at peace, because this wasn't just a new flight, it was a sky she had helped change forever. If this story moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Every click, every share helps keep these important voices heard. This story shows that prejudice and arrogance always bring consequences, while calm strength, dignity, and quiet resilience bring true lasting power. It reminds us that systemic bias and silent discrimination still exist today. Such incidents don't just happen on airplanes, they happen in workplaces, in classrooms, in restaurants, and in everyday life, where assumptions are made before understanding even begins. In our personal lives, we should treat every individual with the respect they deserve without judgment. In the workplace, we must speak up when injustice occurs, even if it's uncomfortable. As a community, we must build spaces where dignity isn't earned, it's expected and protected. By practicing respect, humility, and unwavering fairness, we build a more inclusive and just society, not just for a few, but for all.